Namaste, everyone, and welcome back to our next episode of the podcast as part of the EkaShri Schools of Yoga. And so, as we've been doing for the last couple of weeks at this point, we've been having these different 30 to 45-minute episodes where we discuss key concepts within yoga philosophy. And like we've mentioned in the past, the goal of the podcast has been to not just give textbook lectures on a specific topic within yoga philosophy, but rather to explore what the real-world applications of these particular topics are and to have a concrete discussion around what they actually mean. So we've had a chance to go through a set of different topics so far in the past couple of weeks revolving around Ashtanga yoga. And so to the extent you do have any topics that you would like to address or you would like us to cover, feel free to let us know at info@ekashri.yoga, and we will do our best to accommodate those particular topics. So with that, why don't we go ahead and dive into the topic for today, which is going to be Abhyasa. So at the get-go, Shriram ji, I guess let's start with the most fundamental, concept here with Abhyasa. So what does it actually mean? I guess if you can give what the meaning of the word in Sanskrit actually means, and in the English vernacular, what exactly we should think about the word Abhyasa meaning, that'll be a great start to start from.
Yes, thank you, Vedant ji. So the word Abhyasa is usually translated as practice. So in the context of yoga, the practice and specifically the regular practice of yoga is one of the key ingredients to making progress in our objective, whether the objective is physical health, wellness, or silencing the mind, whatever the goal is. So practice is something that is central to the philosophy of yoga. In other words, the yoga is not just philosophical concepts that we read about or conceptualize in our mind. It has to go hand in hand with abhyasa or practice. So in that sense, practice is very important, and we will delve into what is the technical definition that Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, what does he say about abhyasa, how does he define it? And also we will see that practice is one of the two components that are described by Patanjali as the means to reach the goal of yoga. So practice is one of them, and we will also see the other one briefly today, and maybe in a future episode we will explore more on the second component, which is called vairagya, which is usually translated as dispassion or centeredness. But today we will focus on abhyasa, and then briefly we will see what is vairagya towards the second half of the session perhaps.
Wonderful. So thank you for that level setting around the term, practice and what exactly is encompassed by the word Abhyasa. So I guess, let's move on to the next sort of, I think, just peeling the onion figuratively a little bit deeper. So I've read, Shriramji, that Abhyasa is, and I quote, the effort toward gaining stability in the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. So I think at the very core level, we all understand what that means, right? The mind is inherently a monkey mind. We tend to really jump from topic to topic. It's hard for us as, natural tendency for humans is to kind of oscillate between different topics. It's hard to maintain that focus on one particular thing for an extended period of time. So how should we sort of interpret the word practice in the context of this definition of abhyasa? And what exactly is this practice that we should be building towards in order to quiet the monkey mind?
Yes, in fact, that is how Patanjali defines what abhyasa is. Let me quote the sutra. He says, Tatra sthitau yatno bhyasaha. Tatra sthitau, that means to stand there in that place of tranquil mind. In other words, the chatter of the mind, when they subside, that is the state of yoga. That is how Patanjali defines it, and we have seen that before. Chitta vritti nirodha. That means when the activities of the mind, when the agitations of the mind, they settle down, and the mind is so tranquil, and we are connected with ourselves. So what exactly does it mean? We will explore that also. So when we repose in ourselves, so that is the state of yoga. And whatever means or whatever attempts that we make, whatever device that we use in order to achieve that goal is abhyasa. And that is the definition that Patanjali gives. Tatra stitau yatnaha. Yatna means any device or any attempt or any discipline that we do in order to reach that objective. And here the objective has been clearly stated, which is the state of tranquil mind, which is what the state of yoga is. So whatever we do in order to reach that state, whether we do it inside the yoga mat or outside the yoga mat, is called Abhyasa. So let me narrate a small incident that happened with my teacher. So somebody asked my teacher, a new student in our yoga shala. So they joined just 1 week before this conversation. And then he asked my teacher, how long should I practice every day? How much duration of time should I devote to the practice of yoga? And my teacher asked another question back to him. What is the reason for that question? What are you looking for? And then he said, I want to budget my time. I want to see how much time I can devote. Can I devote so much time for the practice of yoga? And then the teacher asked, would you really like to know how much time is best to dedicate for the practice of yoga? And then he said 24 hours. The point being that Abhyasa can be done both inside and outside of the yoga mat. Every moment in our life can be used as an opportunity to practice, an opportunity to be in Abhyasa. For example, when we sit on the dining table, so just before dinner, so we survey what is there that I'm going to eat now, and we have to make a choice, delicious food or nutritious food. So we have a choice to make, and when we make the highest choice that benefit the body, that benefit the mind, then it becomes an Abhyasa, because that is the attempt that we are making, that is the discipline we are giving ourselves in order to move towards the goal of yoga, which is health, wellness, well-being, tranquility of the mind, and so forth. So whatever we do inside the yoga mat and outside the yoga mat can qualify as Abhyasa. And to extrapolate this further, some of the things that we may be doing inside the yoga mat need not be Abhyasa. For example, when we are trying to overdo an asana or trying to go much beyond the comfort zone of the body. So the discipline is no longer serving the body, it is torturing the body. Say, we are actually damaging the body or perhaps even injuring the body by going way beyond our comfort zone, then it is no longer an Abhyasa. Although it may look like somebody is practicing yoga on the mat, but it is not Abhyasa anymore because it is not leading to health and wellness. So in that sense, Abhyasa is not something that we can say, okay, if you're doing an asana or if you're doing a pranayama, it is Abhyasa. Any activity or any means, any attempt that we make in order to quiet the mind, in order to bring benefit to the body and mind is Abhyasa.
No, that's a wonderful, really, I think, very comprehensive way of putting it, Shriramji. So thank you for the explanation there. And I think you touched upon a lot of very interesting points, right, that we, I think, can kind of keep in mind here. So the first point being that the practice of Abhyasa is not necessarily something that is a sort of just the superficial thing would be to think about it. Maybe it's you have a certain practice that you keep, a certain goal you're working towards on or off the mat. But like you mentioned, this is a 24-hour practice, right? And so really there's never a chance to kind of turn it off, if you will, but rather something that you keep, living with going forward. And I think what would be interesting, so the first part of the question is, now that we've discussed all the different aspects of Ashtanga yoga in the past couple of sessions, can we, maybe touch upon a little bit how that ties out to this concept of 24 hours, the practice of Abhyasa, because I would think the two are fundamentally interlinked, because the yoga philosophy principles within Ashtanga yoga are kind of how you live that good life or that proper life 24 hours. And the practice of doing that is Abhyasa. So that's one thing. And then the second question, just to tack onto this, is, you mentioned this analogy about having the discipline of, for example, when you're choosing what to eat, right? You have the healthy food versus the, let's just say, fast food or the non-healthy food, right? Which is going to be straying away from the practice of Abhyasa, which is going to be going towards the healthy food. So, in our day-to-day lives, so I know you mentioned we have this practice of going towards the healthy stuff, going towards building these good habits, but is it necessarily wrong per se if we, let's just say, have one day a week maybe where we choose to eat non-healthy, or maybe we choose to quote unquote cheat a little bit on our specific diet or whatever specific situation that may lend itself to? So how do we think about that practice versus having maybe these specific occasions where we tend to go outside of that traditional practice and maybe indulge in something that's maybe not consistent with the practice we've built up over time? So how would you think about that?
Yes, those are excellent questions. So let's start from the beginning. How can we integrate the Ashtanga Yoga, the teachings of Ashtanga Yoga in our life? So in our yoga mat, for example, when you are practicing asanas or pranayama, so it is very clear how to apply them. We have discussed the principles of asanas, pranayama, and also we can bring in other aspects like yama, niyama. For example, ahimsa, non-injury, non-harming the body. It can be applied in our asana practice as well. So we respect the boundaries and the limitations of our own body when we practice asanas. On some days, we may not be able to touch our toes, but it's okay. Just because we were able to do it yesterday doesn't mean that I have to undergo pain or extreme discomfort in order to do it again, just because I was able to do it yesterday or 2 weeks back. So respecting the limitations of the body right now. So that could be an expression of ahimsa. So that's how we can bring in the different components of the Ashtanga yoga. And then while being inside the yoga mat, doing the practice, not allowing the mind to stray away. The mind is focused with the practice. The mind is aware of the sensations of the body. Where is the stretch? Where are the different sensations that you can feel? The strengthening sensation, or perhaps massaging sensation in the internal organs of the body when we do the different postures. So being mindful of all of that, so that all aspects of ourselves, the body, breath, mind, all of it participate together in yoga. In other words, it's not just a physical practice, it is also a spiritual practice. We're engaging the spirit, the entirety of our system. In other words, it's a holistic, bringing the practice as a whole. So that is one aspect we can do inside the yoga mat. Outside the yoga mat, for example, when we are sitting on a chair in front of a computer, perhaps we can remind ourselves about the basic tenets of what is a yoga asana. How can I sit so that I expend minimum energy and I don't injure the body too much? You see, because there is a way to sit, and we can borrow principles from meditative postures. In fact, in one of the future episodes, we can discuss about this topic. There are a variety of meditative postures that are given in the Hatha Yoga tradition, where when we sit in that posture, it requires very little expenditure of energy. We can sit there for long periods of time with the mind very alert. So how can we bring those principles in our day-to-day life when we sit in front of a computer, for example, and so forth? And how can we engage the breath so that when the mind is distracted, can I do a few breathing practices, maybe a couple of minutes or 5 minutes, and bring the mind to a place of centeredness? Because you may recall one of the sutras that we saw was Dharana Sucha Yogyata Manasaha. In other words, when we practice pranayama, the breath work, it brings the mind towards one pointedness. So if the mind is scattered, we can quickly bring the mind towards one pointedness. So all these principles we can bring into our daily life. And even when we are engaged in the task at hand, perhaps we are working, or perhaps you are studying for an exam, whatever activity we are doing, even if it is a mundane activity, folding clothes or washing dishes, giving our best, not complaining about it, you see. So doing these tasks with a cheerful attitude, with an enthusiastic attitude. So all these principles we can bring in when we live our day-to-day life, or even how to engage with people. When somebody hurls an insult, then do we reflect it back to them, or how can we transform the situation? How can I um, how can I practice ahimsa in that moment? So all these principles also come into play there. So these are some ways in which we can practice, we can bring Abhyasa alive in our day-to-day life.
No, and that's interesting, Shriramji. So I guess maybe to elaborate on that point a little bit more, can you maybe give some tips as to how we can take, mundane, very daily, household chores, so things like you mentioned, laundry, things like doing the dishes, and how do we, practically think about bringing a positive attitude to that? Because the reason I ask, I think, is because it's very easy to discuss this in a way where if we're not actually doing it, it's easy to put this in words and say we'll have a positive attitude when we're doing these different household boring things. But putting it in practice is a different story, right? Because when we're actually doing it, we may be tired after a long day of work, this and that. And when we do it, it's like, oh, it's almost like, oh my God, I have to do this now. So how would you suggest when we think about these different, mundane, chores that honestly we'd rather be doing other things with our time. How do we think about maintaining that positive attitude when doing that?
Yes, in fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, we see some tips that are given. So Sri Krishna, he teaches many ways in which we can bring a cheerful attitude, even a devotional attitude, when we perform even a mundane task. In other words, we can transform even a trivial activity or a mundane activity into a spiritual activity. And one way to do that is to transform that frustration into love or a devotion. For example, I am doing this because it's going to benefit someone. It's going to benefit the person who I love. It's going to benefit my child, or it's going to benefit myself. It's going to help me get organized. Tomorrow, I don't need to be in a hurry to, because if it's, things around me are messy, then it's not a very pleasant experience. So when we look at the larger picture and why we are doing it, so it's going to benefit either me or it's going to benefit someone who I love. So you allow the actions to come out as an expression of joy and love and devotion, rather than an expression of being frustrated about it. So it is a shift in the mind. So it's an attitudinal shift, and that is also abhyasa. You see, that practice of shifting the way, why am I doing this? I have to do it anyway, so I can either do it complaining, or I can do it with an attitude that benefits me, that I don't offer any resistance. I do it as a flow. In other words, it happens cheerfully. So that is up to me, and using this wisdom as an abhyasa to do it.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thanks for explaining that very precisely. And, I think we've at this point touched upon the concept of, why Abhyasa is important through a variety of the different, topics we've discussed so far. But before we move on to shifting a little bit towards the quality of a high quality yoga practice and essentially what the components are, is there anything else you'd like to mention that we maybe haven't discussed as to why Abhyasa is important, apart from the traditional things you might associate with having some kind of a good routine or good practice both on and off the mat?
Yes, in fact, whenever we see expressions of excellence, people who have excelled, maybe they are master musicians or great scientists and so forth. So all of it came through abhyasa also. In other words, abhyasa was an important ingredient. Practice, regular practice was an important ingredient. A person cannot become a great violinist, for example, just by reading a book on violin. They can know the different techniques, how to bow, how to use the fingers on the violin. They can read a lot about it, but just a conceptual knowledge is not going to help in practice. So in that sense, Abhyasa is very key for self-transformation. And so in yoga, especially, my teacher used to say that there is no such thing as an armchair yogi. So just by sitting and reading yoga books, yeah, that helps. And hopefully it serves as a point of inspiration. Okay, I'm reading about the benefits of asanas. Let me try it. Let me hop into a yoga mat and try it for myself. So putting the theory into practice is what we can call as abhyasa. So actually practicing the teachings, bringing the teachings of yoga alive. So we can think of abhyasa that way.
Wonderful. And I think that, you really mentioned an important point about the whole concept of armchair yoga, right? Where it's one thing to sort of talk the talk, it's another thing to walk the walk, colloquially speaking, right? And so I think, where I personally see that as most relevant for, I think our audience and myself is, we have these tools available to us. So for example, something like a weekly class or something like a guided meditation or something that, we may do sporadically once a week with that consistent habit. But then that's, just doing the class for once a week, for example, isn't enough. You kind of need to build that into a more daily regimen or a daily routine where you can then start to incorporate this as to a fundamental part of your life and really be able to continue that going forward. And I think that continuation, that persistence, that the discipline in, saying, okay, every day in the morning, I'm going to get up for 20 minutes and do, XYZ set of practices for yoga, and continuing that for the period of a year and hopefully longer, I think is something that, a lot of people may not necessarily be able to do no matter how much they want to. So that is, I think, something that really is an important component of Abhyasa. And I think, given that we're recording the podcast now, it's December 23rd, I think it's prime time to really think about this, especially as New Year's resolutions are coming up and as people start to make goals, whether it's, yoga practice, whether it's something like hitting the gym, right? Having that practice now, maybe I think hopefully this will give the audience a sort of additional motivation to keep those New Year's resolutions going, because it's important to be able to really understand why all these practices are important, and to keep that going in order to really build up the a good practice and really understand Abhyasa and incorporate it well into daily routine and daily lives. So with that,
allow me to interject one point. So you very beautifully stated that Abhyasa is walking the walk. So it's not enough if we just talk the talk, but we need to walk. In other words, we need to put it in practice. And I'm reminded of wisdom from Bhagavad Gita. There's a very beautiful verse that says, Yadyad acharati sreshtaha tatta deve tarojanaha. That means whatever exemplary person who has achieved excellence, whatever they do becomes a point of inspiration for others. They will try to walk the same path. People will try to follow the path. The trendsetter becomes a leader. So people willingly follow that trail because they are inspired. Now, in that verse, it says, Acharati Sreshta. Acharati means one who practices or walks the path of excellence. And it doesn't say one who talks well. So again, I'm reminded of another incident with my teacher. So once somebody came to my teacher and said, can you please tell my son to practice yoga every day? I've been telling him about the benefits of yoga for such a long time. Please inspire him to do yoga every day. And then my teacher asked this gentleman, do you practice yoga every day? And then he said, oh, I don't have time, etc. And then my teacher pointed out the fact that we are better able to inspire people when we live the talk. In other words, if we practice yoga, then automatically people around us can get inspired by it because they see the benefits and so forth. But just by talking about it without practicing it, it becomes a little empty words. It doesn't have the power to inspire people. So on the other hand, by practicing, we set a personal example to others. And that way, we are able to share the benefits of yoga with others as well. So in this sense, Abhyasa is not just a selfish practice that we do for ourselves. Sometimes this question arises, oh, they are just taking 1 hour a day and they're by themselves. They are just enjoying the practice of yoga. It's a selfish activity, but it's not like that at all. Because first of all, when we do that activity, this Abhyasa, then we present a much more harmonious or happy and cheerful version of ourselves when we engage with the world. And also, we are giving a personal example. In other words, people, when they see that this person is disciplined, practicing yoga, or the path of excellence, when they see that, they are inspired by what we do rather than what we say. So in that sense, it's very powerful.
No, and I think that that's a powerful and very subtle distinction that you mentioned, right? Where Abhyasa can be used not just for personal gain, but also for the gain of others who you are close to and want to achieve something. And I think that if there's one point that our audience takes away from it, right, Shriram, is what you mentioned about, right, empty words, where, for example, it's like, you if you yourself are not doing what you want others to do, right, what is their intention or their incentive to take you seriously, just given the fact that they will see you not practicing this particular thing, and so it's like sort of it devalues what you're asking for. So I think that's a very interesting point there, and I know we can spend a lot of time talking about the subtleties of this specific thought that we just discussed, but why don't we maybe shift a little bit more towards a high quality yoga practice. And so maybe why don't we start with what exactly, Shriramji, to you is a high quality yoga practice? And then maybe after that, let's decompose it into the 4 different ingredients that are required for this high quality yoga practice, and what do you need in order to maintain that high quality yoga practice?
So in other words, the attempts that we make to bring the mind to a place of tranquility, or to bring the body to a place of lightness and good health and so forth. When we do these practices, these abhyasas, in a way where we are most efficient about it, where we make the best progress. So perhaps in a span of 1 month, what is the best amount of progress that we can make? What are the ingredients that we can bring into our abhyasa so that the maximum progress can be made? So we can call these as the ingredients of a high quality yoga practice, and also to be mindful of what we practice. I think I mentioned one of the incidents with my teacher before, where I used to spend a lot of time on one specific asana. So when I learned Mayurasana, the peacock posture, I attempted the one hand Mayurasana for such a long time, and it took me about a year to achieve that posture. And then when I presented it to my teacher, he said, oh, the same effort, if you had given to meditation, you'd be a far greater yogi by now. So in other words, what is the mix of abhyasas, how much asana, pranayama, etc., what is the way we are guiding our abhyasas is also equally important. So let's jump into the ingredients that Patanjali says. What are the 4 ingredients that he enumerates for a high quality abhyasa to unfold? So the 4 he mentions are, let me quote the sutra first and we will unravel this together. Satu dirghakala nairantarya satkara asevito dridabhumihi. Satu dirghakala nairantarya satkara asevito dridabhumihi is the sutra. So what are the 4 ingredients he says here? Dirghakala is the first one. That means the abhyasas, these practices, should be done over a long period of time. In other words, it's not just a weekend activity, or it's not just a few days activity. It has to be done for a long time, several months, several years, etc. In fact, the true benefits of yoga are in the long term. When we begin the practice of yoga, the first session, of course, we feel very good. The first session and the first 1 or 2 weeks, it feels so exhilarating. It's a new practice and we are so excited about it. But the true benefits of yoga are in the long term. So give yourself the benefit of this long term, which is the highest benefit that we can experience in yoga. Long term practice of yoga, several months, several years, we dedicate to this practice. So that is the first ingredient. The second ingredient is Nairantarya. Nairantarya means without taking a break, without taking a holiday, doing it every day. Or whatever rhythm that we set. It could even be once a week to begin with, but establish that rhythm once in so many days and then stick to it. So without a break in that rhythm, doing it on a regular basis. So that is the second ingredient of a high quality yoga practice. So what is the benefit that this rhythm brings? Basically, it trains the mind and the body. It brings a muscle memory because of the repeated practice. It brings a muscle memory when we do asanas, and there is a certain rhythm that we established in the mind as well. So that is the Nairantarya aspect, which is doing the practice without a break. That is the second ingredient of a high quality yoga practice. The third ingredient is Satkara. Satkara means doing the practice with enthusiasm, with honor and respect. In other words, doing it with a sacred attitude. So we are doing it with a positive enthusiasm, as well as there is a sacredness around it. It's not just a mechanical activity, but it becomes a spiritual activity, spiritually charged. So the practice of yoga has this Satkara element, which is doing the practice with honor, respect. We honor and respect the tradition of yoga, all the masters in the yoga tradition, and so forth. Because this art and the practice of yoga has been given to us through this long, unbroken chain of teachers in this tradition of yoga. So we can profoundly elevate the quality of the practice by transforming it from a mechanical practice to that of a sacred or a spiritual practice. So that is the third ingredient. And the fourth ingredient is asevitaha. Seva means to serve, and asevito means to be in an attitude of full service. We are serving the body rather than demanding the body that, okay, I'm going to practice for 6 months, you better lose those 20 pounds. It's not like that attitude, you see. So when we do the practice with a demand, so that is the opposite of asevito. So asevito means, okay, the body and mind have been serving me for such a long time. Now it is my turn to bring comfort to the body or to benefit the body with asanas, with exercise, and benefit the mind with meditation, benefit the breath work, serve the breath with pranayama, and so forth. So all these practices become a vehicle to serve these different instruments. So that is the fourth ingredient of a high quality practice. So Satu Dirghakala Nairantarya Satkara Sevito Dridhabhumihi. Dridhabhumihi means once these four ingredients are in place, then the benefits of yoga are firmly grounded. Dridha Bhumihi. Dridha means firm. And then Bhumihi, grounded. So the benefits of yoga becomes firmly established and all these four are there. Now, in the beginning, things may be a little different from these four ingredients, right? For example, perhaps we make a New Year's resolution. I'm going to do Abhyasa every day. Maybe not 24 hours, like what we mentioned before, at least some time during the day, maybe an hour inside the yoga mat, or maybe 20 minutes inside the yoga mat. The first 2 days, there might be a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of satkara might be there. But on the third day, when the enthusiasm subsides a little bit, we wake up in the morning and then the body is resisting, right? We have to drag the body inside the yoga mat. And There is a lot of inner resistance there. But what happens is that is only a temporary experience. With continued practice, after 6 months or after maybe 8 months or so, you will notice a transformation. What happens is you wake up in the morning and you look at the time. Wow, it's 4 a.m. Time to practice yoga. And with a beaming smile, you jump into the yoga mat with full enthusiasm. And it happens automatically. So it is just that initial resistance that we have to overcome. But with continued practice, all these 4 ingredients will automatically come in to our Abhyasa. You see, we just have to overcome that initial resistance. And in the beginning, perhaps we miss 1 or 2 days of practice, and rather than telling ourselves, oh, I don't think I'm fit for yoga because one of the ingredients is Nairantarya, doing it without a break. But yesterday I did not do yoga. So that guilt, if we just release and say, okay, in the path of bringing these 4 ingredients of high quality Abhyasa, maybe once or twice I skip. It's like when we are trying to learn a new skill, maybe learning to ride a bike or learning to walk, a kid learning to walk, maybe they falter a little bit in the beginning, but then once the rhythm has been set, it becomes much more easy. So to bring these 4 ingredients, it may take a little bit of time. To get into the groove, it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. But with practice, it becomes very easy.
Wonderful. I think you explained that very clearly. So thanks for communicating that. And I think like the point you made about how the mental mindset shifts from one of where you see this as something you have to do versus something you want to do, right? And so that puts you into a very different mental perspective and state to the point where you can now enjoy it truly, right? And it really doesn't feel like something that, you know, is something that's being forced upon you, but rather something you look forward to every day. So I think that's an important subtlety that, you know, you will get over time as you start to make this practice. And I think that also has to do with practicing correctly, right? As opposed to just going through the motions of practicing, because if you're just going through the motions of practicing, it's unlikely you'll be able to build up that attachment and that level of love for the practice that you're doing, versus if you truly enjoy it and you really understand what you're doing, that comes a lot quicker and you'll be able to intellectually understand why you're doing something and you'll want to do it going forward as well. So thanks for sharing that. And so in the last couple of minutes that we have here, why don't we touch upon the concept of vairagya or detachment and how abhyasa or practice relates to that? And so how should we think about both of those concepts in practice, and what is the relationship that the two have with one another?
Yes, in fact, in the context of abhyasa or practice, we can look at vairagya, the second component, as patience. In other words, when we do the practice of yoga every day as our abhyasa, we are not in a hurry to experience the benefits. It's like when we sow the seeds and then we water the seeds every day, we know that at some future time the seed will sprout and then we are going to see the flowers and the fruits and so forth. But you don't demand that on day one. We don't put a lot of water because we are so enthusiastic about it on day one and then expect to see the seed sprout on day one. So the art of being patient when we do our abhyasa, allow the experience to unfold in its own due course of time. We can think of vairagya that way. We are not hankering to see the results now. We are just doing the abhyasa every day, and then we are waiting for the results to unfold. So we can think of it that way. So I'd also like to mention a few things, some practical tips to keep the abhyasa alive. How to bring in the 4 ingredients of the high quality practice of yoga. One thing we can do is, because we are in it for a long term, because the first ingredient is dirghakala, long time. So think of it more like a marathon than a sprint. In other words, sometimes people get so enthusiastic and they decide, okay, from tomorrow I'm going to practice 2 hours a day. Maybe it is sustainable for 2 days, but then after that, it becomes such a uphill task that to do it every day might be too much. It's too big of a bite. So it is best to start where we are confident that I can do it easily, rather than say investing 1 hour every day in the beginning, perhaps 20 minutes a day. That looks more manageable. 20 minutes I'm going to spend inside the yoga mat, and then design a practice around that. So my teacher used to say that 20 minutes of regular daily practice of yoga is far greater than 2 hours of intermittent yoga practice, say once a month or twice a month. So daily practice, when we spend, even if it is a very short time, when we do it regularly without a break, it has far more benefits. And we can see the reason why when we think about it as a compound interest. The effect of compounding takes place. So when we do the practice today, tomorrow we are a different person. Slightly there's a change. And then from that new vantage point, we do our next Abhyasa, next day's Abhyasa, and then there's progress there. So each day's practice builds on the day prior. So there is the effect of compounding that happens. So that is one tip. The second thing that we can keep in mind is to also recollect or remember the benefits of yoga. In fact, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he begins on the topic of samadhi, because that's the objective of yoga. The first chapter is samadhi, so that we don't lose sight of the benefit. The benefit is tranquil mind, or we can say healthy body. So body, mind, well-being. So health, both at the physical level as well as the mental level. So when we keep remembering the power of yoga and our goal, oh, this is where I'm going to, and a place of well-being and a tranquil state of mind. So when we remember that, it becomes very easy to commit to the daily practice. My teacher used to give an example. It is like if somebody tells you that I'm going to give you $5 million. Only thing is that you have to come and meet me at this place at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? 2 a.m. in the morning. Nobody will say, oh, that's too early for me. I don't think I'll wake up, because I never wake up to the alarm. I always sleep 5 minutes late. Nobody will say that, because the reward is so big that perhaps they will they'll keep the alarm 1 hour early, and they will be ahead of time there, right? So when we look at the reward of yoga, the benefit that we gain from yoga, health is wealth, right? The health of the body and mind is far greater than $5 million when we really think about it. When we meditate on this topic, when we realize that the health of the body and mind is the true treasure. So when we remind ourselves of the benefit that this practice brings, then yes, maybe not 2 a.m., at least 4 a.m. or 6 a.m. perhaps, we can wake up every day and then do the practice of yoga. So that is another thing that we can keep in mind. So let me also share another story, how I personally got myself into the rhythm of daily practice. Again, it was my teacher who used what they call the teachable moment, or it sees an opportunity to share the value of yoga practice with me. So what happened was, when I started my yoga studies and yoga practice with my teacher, so I started when I was 11 years old. And in the beginning, with just a little bit of effort, I was able to make a lot of progress in asanas. I was able to do many advanced postures. And I thought, oh, I don't really need to practice every day. If I just practice once a week when I go to my yoga class, in fact, we used to meet twice a week, Saturdays and Sundays, 2 times a week is sufficient for me, because anyway, I can do this asana. Why should I do it every day? That was my attitude. I didn't realize the value of everyday practice. And my teacher knew that. So the transformation in me, it happened um, during one of the lecture demonstrations. So my teacher used to get a lot of opportunities to talk about yoga and give lectures on yoga. And he used to take some of his students as models to demonstrate the different yoga postures and the yoga practices. And in one of these events, so he took me as a model. And this was in the Madras University with in the presence of a very large audience. About 500 people were there, students and professors of Madras University. And he made me demonstrate the Surya Namaskar, the sun salutation. And at the end of it, people were impressed, and they gave a big round of applause because looks like I did very flexible expression of the sun salutation. And at the end of that applause, my teacher, so he said, in order to gain this level of flexibility and excellence in Surya Namaskar, one has to practice yoga every day. Otherwise, you cannot achieve this. And then he turned to me on stage. He turned to me and said, "You practice every day, right?" So on the spot, he asked me a question, very uncomfortable question. And in that moment, I did not know what exactly, how to respond to his question. And I just nodded my head. So that was a violation of Satya. In other words, that was not the truth, you see. And I felt very bad about it. I thought, oh, I don't practice every day, but I conveyed a lie because I nodded my head. And I really felt bad about it. And I made a resolve. In that moment, I made a resolve that from this day onwards, I will not skip my yoga practice. So that was, I think, in the year 1991. And I have not skipped a single day of yoga practice from that time. And that was like a teachable moment. My teacher used to seize on these opportunities to transform, to bring transformation to his students. And for that, I'm very grateful to my teacher. So he set the path for bringing all these 4 ingredients of yoga in my life. Yoga for a long time, without a break, and with honor and respect. Because when we practice yoga every day, the appreciation for yoga, it just increases with time. And the 4th ingredient is asevito, to do this practice as a way to serve the body and mind and to serve the tradition of yoga itself. So this is one of the most important topics in yoga, because Abhyasa is how we bring life to yoga, how we practicalize these knowledge points and the wisdom of yoga in reality.
Wonderful. That's a very powerful anecdote. And so thank you for sharing that in a very crystal clear and I think in a very instructive way as well, right? And so those teachable moments I think are incredibly important. And like you mentioned, Shriramji, the fact that it's about bringing like passion and a inherent desire to do this particular practice versus the sake of practicing it on its own, right? And so I think you couldn't have put it any other better in any other way. And so maybe why don't we end the conversation there? I think this topic, like we've discussed before, is so incredibly important just from a timing perspective, given that the new year is approaching. And so just as you took this resolve, right, so many years ago about your yoga practice and haven't skipped a day since, hopefully for our listeners, you can use the new year as a catalyst to be able to pick one goal, one resolve, one specific thing you want to achieve for the year, and no matter how small it is, but just the fact that you practice it, you keep it going for the next couple of not only weeks, you keep it going for the next couple of months and then years. And I think as you do find that you continue these types of practices over the course of the long term, it becomes even easier to continue them for even longer after that, because the inertia required to get these practices going and to continually do it is the largest at the beginning, right? And so once you start the particular practice, it becomes incrementally easier for each additional day to keep the practice going, because you will also enjoy it a lot more. So with that, why don't we go ahead and maybe end our conversation for today, since we've had a very productive and substantive discussion around the topic of Abhyasa. But I'll turn it over to you, Shriram, in case there are any very last final thoughts you'd like to add prior to us closing.
Thank you, Vedantji. I just wish to share with everyone in the audience a very happy New Year. And if you take any New Year's resolution, then perhaps these 4 ingredients of Abhyasa, the high quality practice, perhaps can be of assistance, can help keep that resolve.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Shriramji. This was a very productive conversation. I think we've learned a lot from you on this topic of Abhyasa throughout the last 45 minutes to an hour. So with that, why don't we go ahead and end for today, and we will resume with our new set of discussion topics in the new year. And wishing everyone a very happy new year in advance. And we look forward to seeing you all, or having you all listen on the next set of podcasts going into the new year.
Thank you.
Perfect. Namaste. Thank you.